The corridor shifted from a deep red glow to yellow haze over the course of 64 minutes. The time was meant to replicate the natural rising of a star as it crests an orbiting spherical planet. But the concept of a star was at least 2 generations removed from anyone who walked the halls of the massive vessel. The calculations utilized to determine the appropriate time span for a sunrise had been recalibrated nearly a dozen times in the 183 years since the marathon launched. The initial adjustments were met with disdain from those who had known what a sunrise truly felt like. A small group had even staged a sit-in protest that blockaded the navigational department for a handful of days. The solution to this problem was brought to the command staff by the AI Durandal. Durandal handles the various autonomous functions of the ship. Thus, the light cycle fell under his purview, even if the calculations to determine optimal scheduling were handled in the science and engineering department. Durandal's suggestion, which ultimately proved successful, was to quarantine the whole sector and run day and night cycles at 4 times the speed. By day 2, the protesters were wary, having lived through a whole week in a matter of 2 days. It was a shining example of how easy it was to manipulate humans when you removed them from any semblance of natural existence. A planet grounds a person. More than just gravity, it provides an unmoving constant, the natural rhythm of life that cannot be altered by an artificial intelligence given control of a wide-spectrum lighting apparatus. By the time Dean had reached his work post, the lights lining the interior metallic crevice between the bulkhead and the pressurized port doors was almost the brilliant white of daytime. A pneumatic hiss was the preamble to the smooth movement of 1,000 pounds of steel. The door gave way to a busy locker room, where the group of engineers in training were prepping for the operations assigned to them. A public access terminal embedded into the wall furthest from the entryway cast a blinking green glow on the row of lockers nearest to it. Dean shuffled past 10 or so of his colleagues, with a tired greeting being reciprocated to those who could muster up the energy to acknowledge his presence. The group were the top students of their class in mathematics and applied three-dimensional conceptualization. This status gave students the opportunity to continue their education through their early 20s in pursuit of the pinnacle classification of required colonization personnel. If their engineering prowess were to advance to a stage that made them pivotal in the execution of the marathon's true mission, i.e. the colonization of a distant planet in the Tau Ceti star system, then they could gain access to a stasis pod set to be open upon completion of the ship's journey. Dean's face illuminated green as he neared the terminal. His eyes scanned in an analytical pattern. The familiarity with the display allowed him to gather a significant amount of data quickly, and his mind was honed to recall this information throughout the day, so as to complete the multitude of tasks he was assigned. He mouthed the words as he navigated the task sheet: Golf-4, recalibration, disarray resurfacing, bracket, L4-P3 panel, bracket, circuit housing disassembly with testing applied to the CV12.684 housing group. Fluctuating amperage reconciliation with outer lining model alpha housing group 4.9.2.398. Dean took a shallow breath and pulled his eyes shut to verify his assessment of tasks he was assigned. By the time he reached his locker, he had already routed his path for the day, in the exact order which he would conduct the task for maximum efficiency. As Dean bent forward to remove his shoes in preparation for donning his vacuum-safe protective suit, his stomach growled.
Too many protein logs. You should balance with better carbohydrate-rich supplements for better digestion.
Her voice was flat, but familiar. Good morning to you as well, Sandra. Thank you for your suggestion. Maybe the health department does need you. Perhaps nutritionist would be a good title for you. No? Dean cocked his head up and to the right to see if his teasing would be met with emotional response from his straight-faced cohort. Alas, she was neither amused nor angered while she continued to strap on the numerous safety measures on her protective gear. Uh-oh, Dean's trying to take another one of us out. Sean placed his hands on either side of his face and gasped dramatically. Don't do me next. A smile spread across Sean's face as he returned to donning his suit. Dean glanced back up at Sandra to see a slight smile creeping towards the corners of her face, despite her attempts to maintain composure. You know, guys, we really shouldn't... Yeah, we get it. Dean the Righteous, never making fun of his fallen comrades. Sean gestured as though he was the statue of a heroic general. He didn't quit the program 'cause of old Deanie boy. It was just his fragile ego after a slight outburst from a kind-hearted genius. Sean stood as he finished his jab at Dean. He could have killed us, you know. Dean playfully defended himself despite the severity of the truth.
No issues from me. He couldn't hang, even if he was 9 years into the program. I don't want him taking my spot when he wakes up at TC, and he can't help but to defecate when things go a little awry.
Yikes! Sandra's more cold-blooded than you! Sean finished his prep and leaned on the edge of the last row of lockers. Let's just get through today. All we have left after this is final cognitive testing anyway. Then, a nice long nap. Dean and Sandra kept their gaze on Sean as he spoke, contemplating the nice long nap. All three of them knew that there were only 2 stasis pods allotted to their group of what was now 24 individuals, all of which had been involved in the program since they were 15, old enough to be driven toward the lofty goal, but not old enough to fully grasp the social consequences of losing over 100 years of history. The program was coming to a close within the next 2 weeks. After that, the ship's command council would have a final say on who is assigned to stasis. A 10-year engineering course that rivaled anything that the universities of Seoul could put together. Or at least, that's what the students were told. In truth, Dean's group of confidants had pondered whether or not the scientists, engineers, military types, and academics placed in stasis prior to the launch of Marathon would even respect them. To wake up generations later, removed from everyone you've ever known, and be dismissed for your credentials on an unfamiliar planet didn't seem like the opportunity they were sold on during the application process. The group ultimately decided that if their knowledge would help colonize Tau Ceti 100 years from now, then that was enough to justify their placement in stasis. Thousands of documents and procedural paperwork had been generated post-launch that none of the stasis crew would even be aware of. No matter how much data an AI could store and relate, they wouldn't have the same experience implementing any of the solutions required. They would be required for the mission to succeed. That's what everyone in the program had to believe. An opportunity to not die in some ship that they had no choice in being a part of. The connective tissue between all of those who were born on board was the removal of choice. All of their ancestors made a choice to become crew. They were just born into it. The day flowed smoothly without the pressures that would normally accumulate on such a culminating event. The final practical application assessment within operations was a mouthful. But everyone in the program had been through hundreds of stages prior to this. This was ultimately just another step, despite being the last one. The lights lining the passageway that led to the community recreation area were still lit with the ferocity of a midday sun. Dean, Sandra, and Sean were used to the long hours of the program. They hadn't let it stop them from having lives. We can't win. This guy spends his entire morning in the high-gravity chamber like he's a pro or something. Sean was walking backward, facing Dean and Sandra to ensure that they were engaging with his worry.
You made me join this league. Win, lose, or draw. I'm ultimately the one who loses because I have to waste my time with you people.
You see, this is what I'm dealing with here. Sean quickly straightened both of his arms, gesturing frantically towards Sandra while looking at Dean. Please, just sub in this once. This guy's huge. I won't even have room with him on the court. I need somebody with enthusiasm, David and Goliath style. What do you say? Dean smirked, enjoying the familiarity of their group. I would really love to play with you, but I'm actually seeing Jessica tonight. Great. Now I've been dumped by you too. I don't think you really know what that means though. So, at least I still have a chance. What if I give you...
Why are you seeing her again? I thought that whole thing had been over for a while now.
Sandra cut Sean off mid-sentence, realizing that he was going to continue on about this unless someone interjected. Well, I think that she might be... Right, that old Dean is going to be one of the ones they pick. Sean pulled his bald fist towards his face to act out an exaggerated cry. Where? I'm losing my sweet Dean. Where?
Ignore him.
Sandra reached forward and planted her palm firmly in Sean's chest, sending him stumbling backward. He rotated forward to catch himself with his fingers before falling down in the hallway.
What does she want?
I don't really know. Sandra was curious as to what Jessica could have to say to Dean. The whole group was. Dean and Jessica had been on and off for the past 3 years. The tension had been there for at least a few years prior to that. Almost a year ago, they had gotten into an argument about the program. A reasonable response from a serious romantic partner entering their mid-20s was to question a significant other's goal to outlive them by more than 100 years. Dean had known it was coming, but they did love each other. He just felt the situation they had found themselves in was unreasonable, and thus, unreasonable things must be done. Dean realized at that moment that he hadn't fully processed how vague the original message he received was. He had been so busy that he only truly considered how much he wanted to see her. You know, she didn't say. She just said that she wanted to talk and that she missed me. So, is this like a hard no? Sean was walking backward again, engaging with the both of them as they neared the end of the massive transport hall.
Please, shut up.
Sandra was serious, and Sean could tell. He spun around to continue walking down the hall.
Seriously, Dean, don't get wrapped up in whatever this is. We are almost finished, and it's anyone's guess as to who they're going to pick. We all know that the testing parameters have us all grouped so close that it's going to come down to the preference of the council. If you're going to rekindle something with her, you should wait until we are through with the program, and you know what the rest of your life is going to look like.
I know. I'm not letting it affect me. I just think I owe it to her, you know?
You don't owe her this.
Yeah, well... Dean looked towards the ground, watching his boots plod along the metallic flooring. She sounded like she needed to talk.
You're nice. Don't be too nice.
Sandra noticed his withdrawn attitude and recognized that nothing she would say was going to prevent him from seeing her.
This is the attitude I needed on the court. Honestly, I'm over begging for your help, Dean. Stern Sundra here is gonna stiff arm this buff bastard, right?
Sean slipped between Dean and Sundra, wrapping his arms over their shoulders as they approached the doors that led to the recreation area.
We will win, if only to shut you up.
Sundra fought a smile. See, you two make a great rap-ball team. The doors slid open and the group proceeded. The large window observation platform was to the right as they entered the recreation area. A few separate groups of children were playing in various nooks and crannies of the large open space. Numerous toys, courts, play areas, and exercise equipment were interspersed throughout the paths that weaved in between the plant life that was carefully tended to in the garden beds. A reminder of the abundance of life on a planet most of the crew had only dreamt of. Shrubbery, grass, trees, as far as the eye could see, teeming with insects, rodents, and creatures they could only imagine. The stark contrast between the origins of their species and the sterile rock structure they now found themselves on. The rap-ball courts were a crowning achievement in leisure in the eyes of the leadership. The marathon had been built with growth in mind, as an entire colony of humans were going to have to sustain multiple generations on board during its 300-year journey to Tau Ceti. To achieve this, massive sections of the ship were hollowed out but left unfinished. Instead, the rooms had vast hidden rail systems installed that could be operated by the AI or the crew on board for construction purposes. The prefabricated walls, floors, stairs, railing, and fixtures were then stored adjacent to the empty room. This enabled the marathon to recalibrate to the needs of the community on board. It's only natural for a group of over 20,000 people to need new developments over hundreds of years, and this enabled them to do so by just prompting a request for whatever new structures was required. At some point around 50 years prior to Sean and Sundra's Rap-Ball League, a council member proposed an event to create a new sporting activity to enhance the physical engagement of the community. A less-than-loved member of the community had his 15 minutes of fame when he came up with the idea of using the construction rail system to create a dynamic fluctuating court. The design and obstacles of the court could be manipulated by players via commands that are shouted to the AI overseeing the game. Each team came up with various structures that would prove more or less efficient in preventing the opposing team from scoring. A handful of incidences were documented that resulted in serious injury from walls separating people from their fingers or arms. But by the time people began to feel some outrage over the potential danger, it was already the most popular sporting activity on the ship. The council ultimately decided the benefits of the crew's enthusiasm for the sport outweighed the medical cost. Sean had been an avid player since his early teens, but was temporarily removed from the recreation league when an astute observer noticed that the structures he would populate the court with had a suspicious phallic shape to them. By the time his suspension was over, his teammate had found success with someone else. Sundra, being his last resort, begrudgingly accepted his proposition to team up. She joined because she was a good friend to Sean, but she would be lying if she said that she didn't enjoy winning.
Let's get ready. Loverboy has to go see his ex.
Sundra looked towards Dean with an expression of acceptance.
All right, I'm stuck with him. Please remember what I said.
She turned to follow Sean, who was already warming up with his exaggerated leg movements.
Yeah, and whatever I said too. I'm sure it was valuable.
Sean bounced towards the court where a sizable group stood perched at the observation area. Dean smiled and waved as his friends left. He felt content. He was happy to have such good friends, and to be coming to the conclusion of what they all had worked so hard for. The walk to the living quarters was quick, and Dean's pace betrayed his calm demeanor. He felt a certain finality to the way his relationship with Jessica had ended. She didn't feel comfortable with him abandoning her to chase the dream of living planetside. She understood the weight of their position, and she knew the desire to break free from the corridors of the Marathon. The thought of birds alone, creatures of flight, free to explore the grandness of a world, that was enough to make any human desire what Dean sought. But at what cost? The cost of losing everyone you've ever known, everyone you've ever loved. Humans are social creatures by nature, and Jessica understood this, maybe even more than Dean did. It wasn't worth it to her. She couldn't see how Dean did not come to that conclusion too. All of his education and experience, numerous years greater than what most of the crew were afforded, wasn't enough to make him change his mind. She held on to their relationship for years, hoping that something would happen, that he would be cut from the program through one of the hundreds of tests, or that he would come to his senses and see the stasis pods as a death sentence, just like she did. But that day never came, and it slowly pushed them apart until the ultimatum was given.
You have to choose between me and this fucking program.
Dean's response was cold. The lack of emotional expression allowed him to compartmentalize his feelings. It allowed him to get up the next morning and complete the goal he was assigned. To make the cut and operate in the high-stress environment that was the program. I already have. It was straight-faced, and lacked the anger that she had been hurling towards him throughout the argument. They hadn't spoken since, and for the past few months she had been seeing someone else, someone that Dean intentionally avoided knowing anything about. Instead, he buried himself in his education and excelled even more than he already had. The time had flown by, with his focus constantly being redirected away from the emotions he felt for Jessica. When Dean reached the crew cabin with her name printed across the exterior door, he felt his apprehension towards the situation fully for the first time. The heavy doors lacked the amenities of a real home, but none of the crew had ever known the luxury of a peephole, mail slot, or bordered windows that were found throughout the millions of homes back in Seoul. The flat harshness of the metallic structure felt like home, a home at least. Dean inhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and leaned his head back momentarily before extending his finger towards the doorbell. His finger triggered the click of the button before his head returned facing forward, a lengthy exhale pouring out of his nostrils with a meditative smoothness. No noise could escape the interior of the room due to the multiple inches of steel bulkhead that separated the hallway from the living quarters. But Dean could imagine Jessica checking herself in the mirror before opening the door like she had every time when they were together. A minute or so passed before he pressed the bell again. Still no answer. Dean contemplated leaving for a moment, thinking she may have second-guessed her proposition to meet. He considered the possibility that she had sent him a message calling off the whole thing while he was working. He then realized that he hadn't even checked his messages before leaving the locker room at the end of the day. He walked 20 feet down the hall, greeting Miss Jacobs as she passed him going the opposite direction before reaching the public access terminal. Dean entered his credentials into the terminal and turned back towards Jessica's door while the terminal loaded his messages. The screen flickered green, casting a vibrant illumination, which pulled his eyes back towards the terminal. He scanned the screen to find his chat logs with Jessica and opened them to see if he had missed anything. The last message was his response agreeing to meet with her the night prior. No luck. Maybe she forgot, he thought to himself. He decided to return to the door for one final attempt at ringing the bell before retiring to his quarters to study before bed. As he approached the door, he glanced towards the floor, so as to position himself and ring the doorbell, but something caught his eye. A dark red line rimmed the inferior crest of the door. A knot formed in his stomach, but he didn't acknowledge the dread the moment had immediately brought upon him. Instinctively, Dean reached towards the door panel and pressed the release. The pneumatic hiss cut through the silence of the hallway as the door slid open. Dean didn't process what he saw immediately. At first, all he could recognize were the shapes. The desk lining the wall farthest from the door, filled with knickknacks and trinkets. The armoire left open like she always had. The bed mostly hidden behind the wall that jutted out from the doorframe, like waking up from a dream. It took his eyes a moment to parse out the fuzz from his vision. The shape of Jessica remained in his view, but the edges and details were a blur. As his eyes gained their normal acuity, Dean became aware that he was frozen in place, unable to breathe, move, or speak. The fuzziness broke and gave way to the lifeless corpse of Jessica in front of him. She was sitting in her chair, facing the door. The expression on her face was a frozen tear. Her jaw was locked in position, mouth agape, but the softness from the lack of contracting tissue contrasted the rigidity of the emotion. Her eyes were slightly displaced from a large fracture on the top right portion of her skull, just above the ear. Dean gasped for air, his lungs taking a moment to cooperate with his body's request for oxygen. He was unmoving, but was able to put together a plea, quiet at first, then screeching.
Help! Help! Help!
Thank you so much for listening to our audio presentation of Born on Board. Will Dean discover what happened to Jessica? How will Sean and Sandra react when they hear the news? And who will get selected for the stasis position from the program? All of this and more will be answered in the conclusion to our audio play, as part 2 will be releasing before the end of October, just in time for Halloween. If you enjoyed the video, please consider sharing, liking, commenting, and subscribing so you can be notified when part 2 is released. We appreciate all of the support and help and hope that you guys enjoyed the video. Until next time, bye-bye.